Why is it taking so long to achieve full economic equality for women?
This is a very good question, Cristina. Let me address three issues. One of them, obviously, is lack of equality before the law. Obviously, is a very important factor, right? I mean, look, if you need the authorization from your husband to freely engage in the marketplace, your opportunities are going to be curtailed. There's no question about it, right? I mean, if you have a wonderful, liberal, open-minded husband, maybe you're not going to have difficulties. But unfortunately, that's not the situation enjoyed by most women in the world. The other issue has to do with education. There is this wonderful English writer by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft. And in the year 1792, she wrote this book called Vindication of the Rights of Women. And in this book, she makes a very interesting point. She says that the reason why women appear inferior is not because they are intrinsically inferior. It fundamentally has to do with the fact that they haven't received the same educational opportunities, right? So she was a great advocate for enhancing the opportunities available to women in the area of education. We have in the world 800 million illiterates, of which 530 million are women. Just think about what this means, right? We have a large number of women who don't have access to what is perhaps the most important tool for opening the door to prosperity, which means knowledge and access to information. So clearly, education is a very central component of why we are so far behind in terms of, full gender equality in the economic sphere or in other spheres for that matter. The other one, I think, has to do with what I call the misallocation of resources. I think that one of the tragedies of the fact that women are not fully politically empowered is that very often in many countries, the decisions about what are going to be the budgetary priorities or the spending priorities are done by men. And men have other priorities, but that's established fact. Let me tell you, in 2012, the IMF put out a very interesting study on energy subsidies. It turns out that every year, on a global scale, we spend $1.9 trillion subsidizing energy. This is petroleum products, electricity, gas, coal, and so on. These subsidies are equivalent to 2.5% of world GNP. They are equivalent to 8% of total government revenue. Now, the question I ask to you is, who are typically the beneficiaries of these subsidies? For instance, gasoline subsidies. In India, to take an example, it's the middle class, right? So the IMF made a calculation and they discovered that 61% of the benefits associated with these gigantic subsidies are actually perceived by the upper 1/5 wealthiest, the 1/5 richest part of the income distribution. So they are hugely regressive. We think that income distribution is a serious problem in the world today. Well, it is, and energy subsidies actually make it worse. Furthermore, they are so large that they actually have a measurable impact on climate change. They are actually worsening the quality of the environment, right? So in fact, it's difficult to come up or think of a worse policy in terms of the public good, than to do what we're doing. Now, compare that, $1.9 trillion, spent subsidizing the driving habits of the middle class with, for instance, spending on educating girls. There is ample empirical evidence that shows that educating girls is one of the most powerful engines for women's empowerment. The data shows, for instance, that women who are educated, the probability that their own children will be educated is much higher. Fertility rates come down. Children are healthier. There is greater say on the part of women about household income, which means that within the family, because the woman is educated and she works, she will be empowered to make joint decisions with the husband. You know that if you translate $1.9 trillion into these 800 million illiterates that we have in the world, it turns out that we have something like $2,400 per person per year, every year, that we could use to actually, educate and bring people out of illiteracy. And this would have a huge development impact. So the next time that somebody tells you there are hundreds of millions of illiterates in India, because India is a poor country, or any other place in the world where there is a great deal of illiteracy, the answer to that statement is no. It has nothing to do with poverty. It has everything to do with a choice that we have made, for subsidizing energy as opposed to spending these scarce resources on empowering and educating people.
But what incentives could the governments have to change that? Because it seems that we are trapped in a vicious circle. Even knowing those data, and the World Bank contributes for the governments to knowing those data, they are not very willing to change policies.
It is true. I think that one of the sad things about energy subsidies is that people get hooked on them. They become addictive. There are many cases over the last 10, 15 years where countries have tried to take them away or to dismantle them, and then people go out onto the streets because they somehow regard this as a birthright, cheap gas, cheap gasoline, and so on. It seems to me that perhaps the most important incentive for government is to basically realize that by misallocating resources, they are retarding or slowing down the development process. Money that you spend subsidizing gasoline for the middle class is money that you haven't got for connecting your children to the internet, or improving the quality of teachers, or boosting the salaries of teachers. And this, of course, is going to have a important repercussion on economic growth and the ability of your country to integrate into our globalized economy.